James and Debby Farr, and the name of the ranch is Farr Cross, and we raise genetically pure Longhorn cattle.
Would you tell us where we are right now, where we're standing?
We're just east of Terrell, Texas.
Which is just east of Dallas, about
Correct.
by an hour or two, so?
We're about 40 miles east of Dallas, right off Interstate 20.
Where did you get the starter part of your herd? Who did you get them from?
Actually, there was a guy named J.B. Hunn. A lot of the older breeders would recognize him. He's been out of the business for a long time, but we wanted Longhorns just because the Longhorn didn't know really anything about the genetic part of it. We just wanted the cows with horns. And as we pretty quickly figured out after a couple of years that there was a big difference in modern day cattle and the cattle that you see here now. And like I say, JB got our first cattle, but then we started going to the refuge and buying some cows up there. Found out about it, and there was a guy named Jim Curry that worked at the Trails magazine. Jim Curry told me, he said, you ought to stay with these old type cattle. He said one of these days the pendulum will swing. And Jim passed away about a year ago, and he never got to saw the pendulum swing, but he was the marketing guy for the TLBAA. But he encouraged me 15 years ago to stay with these cows, and because of that, I kind of took some advice from people that knew more than I did. Sure.
So tell me, what does that mean to you, though, when you think the pendulum is going to swing? What is the direction it has gone, and what is the direction you hope it is going to go?
Well, when all of the registries and Longhorn associations, when they were all formed, there weren't very many sources of cattle. There weren't the number of, there weren't any organizations you could go to. So, that I guess from the big start was the WR herd at the Wichita Mountains. It's where I would say that was the first organized effort to try to preserve the cattle. There were a few handful of breeders that had some good Longhorn cows, but as far as an organized effort, then Congress did that in 1928 by starting the WR herd, and then fast forward to the 60s, and people started getting together, so we need to create a organization, association, a registry, if you will, and that's where the TLBAA started, and then shortly after that the ITLA, which is Texas Longhorn Breeders Association, and then the International Longhorn Association. And for the first 20 years, I think everybody was on the same page as far as governance go, and how what they did with their cattle and how they raised them. And then somehow, everybody, not everybody, but there's people got off track in my opinion, got off track and got away from the original type cattle and started getting kind of one-dimensional on, one characteristic or another, and primarily horns.
Yeah, the tip to tip.
Yeah, the tip to, one friend of ours called it the horn race, and it just kind of became, I was in it in the beginning, because I didn't know any better, and I think that's where most people get started. They don't know any different, and they don't know about these cattle. I know people have the ability to raise what they want to raise, and they certainly got a choice. And ours is, we like foundation quarter horses, and and I consider these foundation cattle. They are now. I don't guess there's a technical name for them, but that's what they are.
Well, I can appreciate the differences of opinion, and there's room in the world for everybody
Sure.
in how they want to raise their genetics, but it is an irony to me that the single biggest characteristic that these animals are known for to the general public, the horns, is a very it's not quite such a practical thing. The thing that these cattle are truly gifted at, in my understanding, is all of the practical stuff that they developed over 400 years of evolution.
Right. You know, a cow eats a percentage of its body weight in grass every day. And at the end of, 9 months, they got to raise a calf. They should. And it's, people think they're in the cow business, but really they're in the grass business. Because you can't do anything without it, and you just got a conversion rate there that, and I'm not an authority on it by any means, but I know what happens, here, and I don't think anybody else is different, big ranches or small, and they got to convert the grass into a calf, and then you got something that you can sell. Our preference is to sell ours private treaty because we call it seed stock, and they're registered. You can do the same thing. It doesn't matter whether it's you're raising commercial cows and selling them at the sale barn, or you're trying to preserve something. Either way, the basics are all the same.
So now you wouldn't know it looking at these gorgeous green pastures, but these animals are well known to survive on things like brush and cactus.
Yeah, these are spoilt rotten cows here, there's no doubt. They
don't lack for much.
We live in a part of the country that we can grow a lot of grass. It doesn't have the nutrients that some of the other places do in South and West Texas or even other parts of the country up north, but we can grow a lot of grass in a small area here and take care of some cows. So works for us. We get about 50 inches of rain here a year, so we can grow grass.
Do they do as well on the grass as they do in the scrubby areas, do you think?
I think they're just as efficient. I think the animals have, I know these animals have a unique ability to adapt to the environment that they're in. You can take them up north, and probably within the first generation, Mother Nature will let them grow a little bigger, a little heavier, and they just get thicker and carry more body weight to survive. And like I say, with grass is maybe being better in some parts, they can do good. And you take them down south, and they can get by. I've heard stories that they just get by on cactus and meal. Get them some vitamins, and they'll make their, they can survive. And I've never been involved in that, but I sure seen heard lots of stories and talked to know people that have done it.
So that tolerance also applies to temperature changes with hot and cold, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
I hear these do well in Nebraska, and when it gets 20 below, and also in 115 degrees. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm flatlander for sure, and this year, this spring, in February into January, we experienced some of the coldest temperatures we've had in the last century. Right here specifically, and I don't remember exactly what the temperature. It was hovering around 0. We'd been there for 4 or 5 days. All the water was frozen, and I don't see the cow around here right now, but we had a calf that was born on that Valentine's Day, and that morning I saw it, and I said I just figured it'd be a popsicle by that evening, and
survived.
And he's an awful nice young bull calf here today, and just because of his survival, being able to survive that, I think he's a great candidate for a herd sire. How can they go from those kind of temperatures and then all of a sudden survive, get that kind of extreme and survive? It's nothing short of a miracle as far as I'm concerned. A lot of cattle didn't do that well.
Yeah, Will Craddock showed us one of those that was born right in the middle of that nasty storm that you had here, the ice storm, and he says, see, the ears are a little smaller because he lost a little bit to frostbite, and that was it. But she dropped that calf smack dab in the middle of the cold spell, and it made it.
Yeah, it was amazing. I think that was we only had the one born during that, but did great, you know. Like I say, a lot of them didn't fare that well, but their ability to adapt, and I mean, it's more than I can comprehend. I don't know how they do it, but they do.
Now they have other characteristics that even within the original Longhorn breeders type that are kind of selected one versus the other. One might be color pattern, the other is there's a couple different shapes on the horns, right? The lyre shaped and the triple twist.
Yeah.
So what is your preference as to what you think is pretty on the field aside from all those other practical considerations?
Oh, we like the twist.
Like the twisty horns, you know, somebody asked me one time if I had a favorite, and I really don't have favorites, but they can be. There's a lot of uniformity in them in the fact that they all got, you know, they all got great udders. You know, they're great moms, every one of them, you know. This cow right here, she's 18 years old, and that's a new calf right there with her. You know, and she's got some awful twisty horns. I don't know that you can't predict their colors. You know, anybody that says that, you know, hadn't calved any yet. But you can't predict their colors, and so conformation, body conformation, and shape. You know, they usually stay pretty true to what they are. That's why, you know, you pick good bulls and put on good cows, and you'll usually get good calves.
Now that good mothering instinct is, it translates to protection from predators too, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Have you had experience with that at all?
Well, we had one that lost a tail to a coyote, and that's about it.
Yeah, we don't, they're not bashful about taking care of their own. We don't have a lot of, you know, we got relatively a small place here, and we've got field fencing around it, so I'd say it's more kind of predator proof to some degree. We don't get a lot of coyotes here. They're all around us, but our particular herd is, you know, they're pretty well protected, I guess you could say. But I'd say the biggest problem we have right now is buzzards. You know, a newborn calf, there's some buzzards around that's kind of migrated up here and from the south, and they're extremely aggressive. And I've seen these newborn calves, I mean, them buzzards sit and wait for that calf. They'll see one being born, see a cow down, and they'll get right down there and go to work on them. And, you know, if they can get their eyes pecked out, well, that calf will die. And it's a brutal thing to watch. And I see these cows get out here and fight them off.
That's the first I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Wow. And it's probably if that's not something that these cows are used to, I would think that might be a little bit more difficult because it's an aerial predator, and they're maybe not have had to deal with that quite so much.
Yeah, they don't. It's not like they come swooping down like a hawk or an owl and grab something. They'll come right down to you, get on the ground, and just sit there and fight with them. And that's another thing about these cows that, you know, they, you know, most of God's creatures, you know, they got a way of getting along. You leave them alone, stay out of their way, and respect them, and they'll respect you. You know, they're not looking for trouble or anything, but you get in their way and impede what they get the feeling like they're being invaded on, then, you know, they'll fight back. They do.
Yeah, and yet they're a very gentle animal in my experience compared to maybe the aggression level on some other breeds.
Yeah, you can turn your back on a lot of these and you'll be all right.
And a lot of them will come up and lick your hand.
Yeah, they're gentle.
They are.
We're not big about hand feeding these, you know, just because you can make pets out of them. You know, if one chooses wants to come up and get close or whatever, that's their choice. That's not ours. We don't teach them to train them to to make pets out of them or anything. We like to keep them gentle, and if you can do that, well then you've done enough.
But we come out almost on a daily basis, so they're comfortable with us.
Yeah.
And yet we're in this field and we have equipment here, and they haven't been truly aggressive at all in any way, shape, or form. We had one come up and try and lick the stand, and that was about it. But that's not what most people would associate with an animal with a horn set like this.
Yeah, that's true. They're intimidating.
Yeah.
You know, they can be, and like I say, it's all about giving them a little respect. You know, they sure got their own mind and ideas about what they're doing. They just want to get their next bite and go on their way and take care of their own. And that's what they, you know, you don't impede that, then y'all can get along. They're good-natured animals.
They very much seem like that, and they give off that vibe, so to speak, because we've been in places. I mean, they're wary. They're always alert. They're almost very curious animals because they're aware of us the second we set foot in the pasture.
Yeah.
And they're that way. It's not just your cattle that are like that. It's every herd we've been to. They're like that, and yet not threatening in the least. The biggest threat we've had is when they were kind of swamping a couple of the vehicles, when we had a couple people that were kind enough to try and lure them close to the cart so we could get some good shots of them. And we got swamped with cattle that are trying to get close and get cubes. And they'll swat flies and the head goes around, but that's as close as you're going to get to getting stabbed by these guys if you leave them alone. It's a really great thing.
Yeah, I've never been hit by a horn. I've been bumped by cows trying to get out of the way of another cow, but never. You know, they're just not bad. You know, not to saying that there's not some that aren't, that, you know, that wouldn't come get you in a right situation. But if you give them their space and respect them, you won't have any. They're easy to get along. They're good-natured.
So, would you say this is a good family cow, and why, if so?
I think they can be. I think they adapt to their environment pretty well. We bought cattle off of the refuge that been raised there their whole life, you know. We bought mature cows, 10, 12, 15, 16-year-old cows that's never been anywhere but the refuge, handled once a year, and never fed out of a sack. And we brought them here, and within a matter of days, you know, they blend into the herd, and they're, you know, you can't tell them apart. So, yeah, they're, you know.
Very adaptable.
But we've been to the refuge and been in their pens with them, and they'll, you know, we've had them come after you up there. But that's, you know, you take them out of 20,000 acres, put them in a confined area, and they don't understand what's going on. So, like I say, it's all about some respect, and but yeah, they're gentle. They're gentle by nature.
Bubba had his grandkids there, and they were walking around the field and very used to the cattle, and they're what, you know, 10 and under, his grandkids were, for the most part. And the cattle were just fine with them.
Yeah.
And the kids were just fine with the cattle. So that's got to be a really nice thing if you want to get into raising cattle, and you want something that's a good starter cow that might have a little bit of forgiveness in the margins there. This seems like it might really be a good cow for that.
Good term, forgiveness. I guess if you were going to buy some cattle from somebody, you know, you could go look and see, and you know, and most cow people know their herds, and they know which cows. You know, we've got one over there. We call her Watch Out Wanda, and just like she's standing there watching right now, you know, we bought her. She was a mature cow. You know, she's been here 3 years now, and she come from big country, you know, down in Ozona. And here she is, you know, she was probably on 10,000 acres most of her life, and now she's on 160. And so you could call that confined in her mind. And but she's always weary of what's going on. But you know, she's fought those coyotes and every other animal that would be in that kind of country, probably mountain lions and stuff. And but she, you know, she's never offered to make a run at anybody or nothing. She'll watch you as just like you like looking at her. She's a pretty cow.
I kind of think most all of them are pretty, I have to admit. I don't know if that's a thing that would get me thrown out of any cattleman's meeting if I call the cow pretty, but I think they're pretty.
They all think
They are
that
pretty.
one way or the other.
So now, we talk about them as a good family cow, but these cows are not widely known necessarily. These cattle are not widely known necessarily to the general population. And you and I were speaking a little bit earlier about the opportunities to get the word out and do a little marketing. Tell me what you think might be a good thing for the beef cattle universe in knowing a little bit more about this animal and making it popular, and what the opportunities are out there.
You want to say anything about that?
Well, you know, they
Everybody's got
saved the
opinions.
nation at one point, you know, when they drove them up the trail and then, you know, to the railheads, and then they shipped them to Chicago and New York. And after the Civil War, when there wasn't, you know, a big commodity of beef cattle around, these filled that void. And you know, a lot of different trails all the way up to Montana. And so there were herds up there. And James has a cousin that has a herd in northern Idaho. But there are so many qualities about the Longhorn beef. It's low in cholesterol. It doesn't marble like, say, an Angus will. It's more like a deer in that its layer of fat will go between the muscle and the skin instead of marbling through the meat. So you get a much leaner, just about cholesterol-free cut of beef, you know, and then if you cook up 2 pounds of hamburger meat, you're not gonna have a tablespoon of grease left. I mean, it's just, and it tastes better. And it doesn't have any chemicals in it, doesn't have any growth hormones. So, you know exactly what you're getting, what God created, and not something that, you know, is artificially injected with something to make it grow and to put on weight, and it's just a lot healthier for you.
One of the cow business in general is high risk business at best. So whether you're raising commercial beef cows, you're raising registered beef cows of any breed, doesn't matter what it is, you know, Hereford, Charolais, Angus, you know, Scimitar, it doesn't matter. You know, that they all have risk involved in raising them. The Longhorns for us is fortunately, it's not our livelihood, but we feel it's a worthwhile endeavor to try to maintain a breed or a pool of genetics, even, if you will. I mean, it's that far down, and we do it because we think we'd like to think we make a difference in a heritage breed. You know, there's like I say, all cow business livestock business in general is high risk. So you got to do something that you like doing. You know, if you're going to pick something you enjoy being around, whether it's cows or goats or whatever. But the Longhorns for us is kind of a preservation effort. That's what we like to think, and it makes us feel good to have them, and to be able to offer these kind of cows.
But it could be a little bit more than that too, than that feel-good feeling, in my opinion, because it seems to me, you and I were speaking earlier about the profit and loss. The P&L is kind of the the end of the line when it comes to many things. How can I afford to keep this thing going? It's either a lot of money in because it doesn't really have to be profitable, or it's a lot of money or less money in and maybe more, but more or less money out, because it's inputs and outputs at the end of the day in the beef cattle industry, correct?
Yeah. I think there's some marketing opportunities that you know, whether people do it from a grass-fed beef perspective, it's something, you know, that you could, you know, there's a lot of ways to do it, and I've tried a lot of them. I think that people, if people had more information about what these cattle actually were and how valuable they were as a producing unit, and it'd probably make a big difference. Marketing, we sell more private treaty. That's what we try to do. There's not a home for these bull calves so much, but most of the heifers, we don't have any trouble selling those usually. It's just it's almost a niche right now, and people do it. People own them. They say that 50% of the cattle raised in the state of Texas, the majority of them only have 50 head or less. The other 50% have 1,000 or more. And
pretty big jump.
Yeah, so there's the 50% of the cow population in the state of Texas are small-time breeders, and they can, you could do. I don't know what the best way to market them is. For me, it's always been kind of word of mouth more than anything. You know, somebody finds out something about it, and they bring some home, and their neighbor sees them, and they say, "Man, I like that," or "That meat tasted good," or this or that, and kind of go from there. But as far as just having a real solid marketing plan, I don't think anybody's crossed that bridge yet.
I think now is the time, and I think maybe you're the guy to do it in this particular moment. So one of the things I think is an opportunity is that if this state has 50% with 50 head or less, you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're not going to have 40 guys who are going to be out there helping you do your management, right? If you're 50 head or less, you probably have one or two people doing the bulk of the business.
Husband and wife.
Number one, yeah.
So there's a real value to this cow.
Boss and a gate guy.
A gate girl.
Yeah, I can relate to that in my marriage, yeah. So, but this animal, it's my understanding, you really don't have to go out and pull calves. They don't really want you there.
Never.
You don't have to do a whole lot of veterinary work on them. They'll take care of themselves with pest resistance and, to some extent. And in terms of things like feeding, maybe there's a little less of that you have to do too. So when it comes down to it, for the small rancher, 50 head and under that has one or two people running it, this seems like it's the ideal animal.
Well, it's perfect. They, like I said, they calve easy. They breed easy. You can just walk out the next morning and, you got a pasture full of Easter eggs, because your calves are all different colors, and they're all fun, and they're all up, and they're nursing, and they just aren't an issue. You don't have to bring them in at night, and you don't have to try to have them all calve within a 3 to 4 month period. Just our weather is tolerable enough that we have calves all year long here.
When we first got cows, I would call people that I knew that were knowledgeable about cattle, and I would say, "Man, I got this cow and this, that, and I got this problem, that's something, what I need to do about this or what I need to do about that." And the smartest guys would always tell me, "Leave them alone." And still today, I figured out that that's exactly right. The more you interfere with them, especially in their calving and stuff. I mean, in 23 years, I've never pulled a calf, never. And I know people that have jobs doing that. And those aren't fun jobs because it's usually in February and it's a 24-hour deal and they've got, 800 of them to calve out, I never understood all of that, but they do that to try to get the big calves, and but there's a cost involved, just like you're talking about. And for somebody that wants an animal that's as maintenance free as you can get, then with some common sense and some grass, you can get along with these cows pretty good.
I'm glad that you mentioned the calves, because you also experiment a little bit, as many ranchers do these days, because you want to keep economic viability and because you probably are a little curious. You have 1 or 2 calves in here that are mixes. Would you tell us about that?
Yeah, we've I bought some cows that had been crossbred. A couple of cows. It's not uncommon for the Longhorn guys to buy 1 or 2 at a time because they see something specific that they like. It's pretty common. But I bought calves that had been under Wagyu bulls, and they do all right. I mean, they're all calves right now. I mean, I'll sell them. I've got some Charolais cross calves that I bought from a guy that he dispersed his herd, and we got some of the older, mature Longhorn cows. He specifically had Longhorn cows because he knew how efficient they were. But he also knew that putting commercial bulls on them could give him an advantage over what we call spotted calves at the sale barn, where they usually take a price deduct just for having horns or being spotted. And so using solid colored bulls will usually, commercial bulls will take horns off, and if you're lucky, you'll take all the color out of them and make them solid. And we've got some here that where we've bought cows that were in those programs, but we've got them where, we've done it too over the last 20 plus years. We've used black bulls, probably 3 different times. And in our particular case, the money isn't any different, and you can take them to the sale barn. 2/3 of them will be solid black and no horns, and the rest of a couple will be spotted, and that just makes all the difference in the world at the sale barn. It's 50 cents a pound difference probably.
You need to get the black shoe polish out, and then you get rid of that problem, right?
You could do that, but it'd probably be raining on sale day.
But even so say you do get a little bit more of that conversion ratio on the bigger breeds.
Right.
If you chose to do that, you're also going to have a little bit more of the input, the outputs for that, right? I mean, they might.
Yeah, you got to have more grass to feed them.
Right.
And it takes more grass to get them there. That's. I don't know. I think it's all about numbers, and the guys that make money are the ones that have big numbers and small margins. And they can, the bigger the number, the more they can absorb a little loss here, take a hit. But the guy that's got 10 cows, it's just not that big a deal. You just can't you can't. It's not going to make any difference. You can have the black or you put a black bull, you have a Longhorn bull. Doesn't matter. If that, that you're gonna. It costs the same. It costs the same to make any of them grow. It goes back to the grass. How much grass does it take to convert them into pounds of animal?
So if you did want to do what I'm assuming that most of the Longhorn breeders do, that niche market that cares about where their food comes from and wants a little bit more of a responsible animal, so to speak, one that you don't have to pour feed into it at high rate. Those people might be willing to come and find you or the organization, correct? Maybe they'll come to the CTLR and say, hey, I want some beef from a local person. Can you hook me up? Does the CTLR do that at all?
Yeah, they'll when being a member of the CTLR has been beneficial in a lot of ways. I had the cows before, I had these type of cows before I became a member of the CTLR. And I'd already used black bulls with that, and it already probably cycled that at least one time before I ever, you know, from Longhorn bulls, black bulls, and back to Longhorn. Well, crud, that's 5 years right there. And when I got involved with the CTLR, well, that's when that genetic part of the animal really became more of a focal point. I'm glad there's people in the CTLR that are more genetically and scientifically oriented than I am about that. I like the animals, and I think there's a lot of benefit there. You know, I'm probably not the best person to really have much of a conversation about the genetics of the animals. I know that about the testing that we do now and what role it plays in purity and detecting impurities. You know, other breeds, you know, is more specifically, you know, the Bramer type cattle. You know, we have, you know, we can tell, you know, real quick, you know, how much of that is in the animal, and we got, you know, we got parameters to where you only take so much. But as far as getting crossbred animals and mixing those together like you're talking about to try to be more efficient, I know that I think that's a bridge to come and cross that, and I think the future is wide open about that. Honestly, I don't think anybody knows how big of a part these Longhorns could, how big of a part they could play in that kind of a program. I don't think nobody knows yet.
But it seems as though experience over the last 400 years has taught us that in this world, I don't know about, well, yes, I do know about Texas, but the big thing on the news now is that most of the West is in a drought, and it's going to be the normal situation for us. It's the rule, not the exception. And so an animal that's shown to produce in times of drought, those are genetics you want, really.
Right.
Exactly.
So I do think that there's a real potential for economic benefit of this specific animal, but at a genetic level.
There's no doubt they bring something to the table. They absolutely do that no other animal, no other bovine can bring.
Well, that's, I think, why they were crossed with, you know, breeders would cross them with everything to take the good from the Longhorn, you know, and pass it on to something that was, you know, beefier, would produce more meat.
And you can always do that as long as you got the pure Longhorn bull around, right?
That's right. Cow. You know, every breed is, everybody's looking for the next deal, you know, and the next, and I guess to your point about the question, what do these cows bring? Or they bring a lot. Well, I think all these other breeds are answering the questions for us, because nobody's satisfied with a straight anything. Everybody wants a hybrid something because what they have isn't good enough, and they've gone here to get this, or they've gone there, or they've refined their breeding program so much that you got to spend $300 worth of medicine on one every year to get it to qualify for us, you know, to a program, you know, that they fit in. So I mean, that $300 is coming from somewhere, and you can only hope you get it at the end, you know, or you're not in, you know, like, you know, we got friends in all parts of the country, and right now things are bad in a lot of parts. You know, it's on fire out west, and it's dry as it can be up north, and you know, North Dakota, we got friends that, you know, where they usually have 80, 100 inches of snow. You know, one guy told us, you know, he never got his mud boots out this year.
You got, what, 9 inches or something?
Yeah, 9 inches of snow where they normally have 100. I mean, you know, and I would bet everything that one of these cows will survive over anything else because they've been here longer than any of the rest of them.
Oh, and not only survive, but produce.
Produce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing. You want something that thrives or as close to it as anything you can get, no matter what the conditions.
Sure.
Exactly.
Because if there's one thing that's for sure, it's those conditions are going to change more quickly than they ever did before. Heat, cold, you name it. Look at Texas.
Yeah.
You have a cold snap, and then what's the temperature soon after that?
Yeah. 0 to 100.
Yeah.
Very much the case.